Hello and welcome to my channel, and if you've been here before, welcome back. My name is Alfonso Peluso and I'm a Studio Associate Professor in the College of Architecture at IIT, the home of the legendary architect Mies van der Rohe. Today we're here to look at the box morph technique in Grasshopper. Now this is a classic tessellation technique where you want to pattern a surface with um, a unit, I'm going to call it in this video. And here you see a surface, and we can look at this in a front view. So you see this tessellation, you see these magenta and cyan objects that I've tessellated, and this is the unit right here that I'm tessellating to this surface. So this is one method. It's kind of a classic method. It's a really easy method. It's a great method. There are some things that you can't do with it, and we're gonna go over all of these, as you can see in my little topics window here. Before we get going into the tutorial, I want to thank you guys for following me on my Instagram. This is my Instagram. It's my first name Alfonso _ my last name Peluso. Thank you. A lot of you have followed me and reached out to me, and you can see what I'm up to on a daily basis with my students. Here's one of my classes. We're in Crown Hall pinning up some work. We're here looking at some 3D printing exercises. You can also see when my latest videos are coming out. So yeah, I appreciate you following me on Instagram. And also, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, please go ahead and subscribe. And once you subscribe, click on the little bell to get the notifications. And you can see I have tons of videos on here that are gonna be really helpful for you. Okay, so let's jump back into Rhino and Grasshopper. Okay, so I'm just going to go over to a new file here, and I'm just going to go ahead and recreate some of this geometry with you guys so you can see how it was made and have a feel for it. Now, I'm making this geometry in Rhino, but of course this geometry could be made in Grasshopper, but just to move the video along a little quicker, we're doing this in Rhino. So all I did was I made a box, and make sure my grid snaps are on here. So I'm making a box, some height, and then I'm making a separate plane or a separate surface that I'm going to bring into Grasshopper. And I'm just doing that by typing in the command plane. And this is going to be a vertical plane, so I'm clicking on vertical, and it wants me to pick the start edge and then the height of that plane. So now you can see that plane with its iso curves. Now I'm going to go ahead and manipulate this surface, and I'm going to manipulate it here in Rhino. I also have a video that I'll put a link to at the end of this tutorial on how you can manipulate it in Grasshopper. So basically I'm going to take this surface and I'm going to rebuild it, and I've entered in 6 and 6 for the U and V count with a degree of 3 for both the U and V. And now I'm going to use the points on command, and I'm going to start to manipulate a few points. So I'm going to take a few of these points, and I'm going to, for instance, I'm going to drag this one out as well, and then I'm going to lift these points up. So I'm thinking of this as a complex building facade, and I'm lifting up the bottom of this so you can enter into the building. And then I can lift some of these other points or manipulate some of these other points as well. So this is one quick way to manipulate a surface that was just a plane. Okay, so a couple more of these here. Okay, and I can always manipulate more if I need to. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bring that surface into Grasshopper, and I'm going to do that through a container. And I'm going to bring that in through a surface container in this case. Okay, so I'll go ahead and right click on that and set one surface. Okay, so now that surface is in Grasshopper. Okay, so a few things that I need to do to this surface. So let's look at our little layout here. So the first thing I need to do is I need to use what's called an ISO trim, which allows me to divide this surface into multiple surfaces, because at the moment it's only seeing it as one surface, and I need it as a bunch of tiny, or a bunch of smaller surfaces, I should say. So we're going to divide that up, and we need a couple capsules to do that. The first one is something called ISO trim, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that requires that I plug a surface into it, and that's going to be important. Okay, so we'll get to that later. Alright, I'm here in Chicago, as many of you know, so it's just started to rain, which is kind of nice, hearing the sound of the rain outside. Okay, so I've plugged the surface in. What else does it need? It needs a domain. So it's a surface, and the type of domain that I need is a two-directional domain, a domain in the U and a domain in the V. So I'm going to double click, and I'm going to type in divide domain, and I'm going to use divide domain 2, which stands for the two directions of a surface, the U and the V direction. Okay, so I can go ahead and I can plug that in. And that isn't going to show me anything. You see when I deselect it, it has the color of my hidden capsule fill. That won't show me anything, but when I plug it into the ISO trim, then I'm going to see all of the smaller surfaces. If I deselect that, you can see that now. So those are divided up by this U and this V count, and I'm just going to divide these up equally for now. I'm going to use a count of 6 for both of those. Okay, so just to recap, divide domain essentially creates the ISO curves, so no three-dimensional geometry. Those are the ISO curves. Then ISO trim trims, or creates rather, a surface between those ISO curves. So coming out of this capsule, we'll use our friend the panel here. Coming out of that is a bunch of untrimmed surfaces. Okay, so we've gotten that far. That surface is ready to be tessellated. Now we have to create a unit to tessellate it with. So I'm going to go over here in Rhino, and I'm just going to make some geometry here. So I'm going to start by making a rectangle. Okay, and I'm going to create some curves through here. So I'm going to actually turn my grid snap off. Okay, so I'm going to use an interp curve. And I like interp curves because those are the curves that when I click with my mouse, it creates the geometry right where I've placed my mouse. So actually, let me turn my grid snap on for a moment. Got that on? Nope. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. Alright, so here we go. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to mirror this over to the other side. But what I don't want at the moment is I don't want this to come to a point like it is there. So I'm going to actually manipulate this geometry a little bit, turn my grid snap off. There's my dog Rita barking in the background. Okay, so I'm going to take this point, and I'm going to take this point, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull those over, and I'm going to do it in such a way so it's just along the x-axis. Okay. Alright, so we'll go with that, and I'm going to go ahead and mirror that over about this midpoint. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and join these two together, and I'm going to offset them a distance of 2 inches. Just offset those to the inside, and I'm going to add some curvature through the fillet command with a radius of 0.0625, which is 1/16 of an inch. So I'm going to go ahead and fillet these, get some radii. Okay, so now I'm ready. I'm going to select these and type in ZS for zoom scale so I can orbit about them. So I'm going to just go ahead now and take these two and extrude them. And I'm making sure that solid equal yes is on. I don't want both sides in this case. So solid equal yes, and the height doesn't really matter in this case. Alright, so that's my unit. That's my unit to tessellate. So I'm going to bring that into Grasshopper, and I'm going to do that through a geometry capsule. Go ahead and right click, set one geometry. Okay, so I have that. Okay, so the capsule that we're looking at next, so we've looked at isotrim, we've looked at divide domain 2. The next one is a box morph. So let's look at that. So I'm going to double click and type in box morph. Okay, and I'm going to choose box morph, and let's talk a little bit about what this capsule wants on the input. So the geometry, that's the unit that we want to tessellate, or the geometry that we're going to tessellate. That's what we just made here in Rhino. Then it wants a reference box. So we're going to create a bounding box on that unit. And then it wants a target, which are going to be a bunch of bounding boxes on the surface. So the unit to tessellate, its bounding box, and then the bounding box on the surface that we're going to tessellate. Okay, so let's plug in, this is the unit to tessellate. We're going to give it a bounding box. Okay. Notice now this bounding box, it's per object, so it places a bounding box per object. So if we create multiple units to tessellate, we're going to have more than one bounding box, and we'll look at that at the end of this video. So I'm going to plug that in. You see there's a green bounding box showed up on the unit, and I'm going to go ahead and plug that into reference. Okay, so that part is done. Now we're going to need our target boxes, our target bounding boxes. So right now on this surface you see a two-dimensional UV grid. We're going to use a surface box, okay, that has a few more inputs. It has a surface, so we're going to plug that in. It has the domain, which we already have here. And then it has a height, okay, and this is the height that's going to control the height of the unit. You'll see the extrusion height will have nothing to do with it. So I'm just going to put in something pretty small here. So I'm going to type in 1.555, give me some decimal places, and we'll come back to that. You can see that it's created the height of that box. I can make it a little bit smaller. Okay, so now we're ready to morph this by just plugging this into the target. Okay, so you see that has now morphed itself onto the surface. It's almost that easy. All right, let's give ourselves some capsules that will allow us to see this more easily. So I'm going to use a capsule called the custom preview. I'm going to plug that in. So you see by default it has this really light purple color to it, and I can add what's called a color. Now in Grasshopper, David Rutten, the guy who created it, he's using the European spelling of the English word color, so C-O-L-O-U-R, and I'm going to use a color swatch in this case. I'll plug that in, and you see I can change that color, and it'll update. Okay, so that's a good place to start. And let's bring down one of our friends, a panel, and we'll plug that in. So you see we have a bunch of closed B-reps, so that nothing's joined together. We have basically just our unit tessellated so many times on that surface. Okay, so that's the box morph. Okay, now I want to talk about a few things because, yeah, it looks magical, right? It looks like, oh, this is the greatest thing in the world. But let's look at a couple issues one might run into. So I've written here, only works on untrimmed surfaces. So if you have a trimmed surface, let's actually look at that. So I'm going to take this surface for right now, and I'm just going to copy it off to the side, use some distance with my grid snap. Okay, and I'm going to take this surface now and I'm going to trim it. And I'm going to trim it with an interp curve. So I'm going to go ahead and draw an interpolated curve through here. Okay, and I'm going to type in trim. Select cutting object is the curve I just drew. Object to trim is my surface. Okay, let's go back to perspective. Okay, so there's my trimmed. Now this is still previewing the original. So let's actually I have to deconnect this or disconnect it. Okay, so for right now I'm going to disconnect the geometry. Okay, so now let's hide this trim line. Okay. Alright, so let me show you how this is going to turn out. So I'm going to set the trimmed surface. So set one surface, and that's actually already set. So what you're seeing is that Grasshopper actually untrims it. Okay, and the best way to see that is, okay, there's the trim surface. Now you see that in Rhino. That's the trim surface. And then when we do the divide domain and the iso trim, it just untrims it. It just ignores it. So I remember, way back when I was first introducing this concept to students, this box morph, that was the first thing students would run into is, it's not working on my surfaces. It's not working. It's extending them beyond and making a box out of them or a full rectangle, and that's the issue there. So it doesn't work on trimmed surfaces. There's other ways to make a surface like the one we made, but by trimming it, it's just not going to work. Okay, so I'm going to get that one out of the way. I'm going to move my original surface back in place here. Just want to make sure that moves correctly with the snap. Okay, and let's bring that back in. Okay, so we've got that. Can plug this back in and alright, so there's our tessellation. So now I want to add another element to it. If you remember in the beginning, there was a cyan ring that was being placed around the tessellation. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add to this tessellation. Okay, so I'm going to draw a line down the center here, just a diagonal line, just to give me some reference. I'm going to draw a vertical line from the midpoint. Okay, just something to give me, Rita's, I don't think she's loving the rain today. Alright, something just to give me a vertical line. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and draw an arc. Start of the arc is going to be here, end is here, and then that's going to be my end. So that's going to give me a vertical arc. And I'm going to go ahead and just give this a thickness by offsetting it. Now something I'm going to do when I offset this is I'm going to say in C-plane in C-plane, no, or else, and that's not the default. If I do in C-plane, it's going to offset that in a plan view. So, okay, off C-plane, no is on. My distance is going to be 2 inches, and I'm going to go ahead and offset that. And now I have to do some trimming. You see that it extends below that line there, so I'm going to trim it there. And I'm going to have to do the same thing on the other side. This has to be completely closed. Actually, I don't have a line there, so I'm just going to draw a line across. And I'm going to trim that one. And then I'm going to trim so that I have just a line to close it. Okay, so I have that. Do one on this side. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and join these together. Let's see what my result is. So if I, just as long as I have one closed curve there, if I type in the command what, let's see what we have here. Okay, so it's open. Something to always check. So somewhere it's open. In this case, I'm going to use the command in Rhino, which is close curve. Okay, so let's check it one more time. Type in the command what. Alright, so we got a closed curve there. It's showing up right here. Closed poly curve. Okay. Alright, so let's go ahead and bring that in. Actually, before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and extrude this. Okay, it's giving me some error. Now, the extrusion I'm going to do for this, I'm going to extrude at both sides, and then 1 inch. So it'll go 1 inch one way, 1 inch the other way. It'll be a total of 2 inches. Okay, there it is. So now, in order to tessellate this object, I just need to bring in its own geometry capsule, and I can set that geometry. And I'm going to need its own bounding box. Okay, there's the bounding box. And I'm going to need its own box morph. So let me bring out another box morph. Okay, so the geometry is this new geometry, which is that one, that arch. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. Try to not have these wires cross behind one another for you guys. So that's the new geometry that I'm going to box morph. Okay, the reference bounding box is that one that just got highlighted in green. That's the reference. And the target bounding boxes are coming from the surface box that I just highlighted in green. Those are the targets. Okay, so I'll plug that in. Okay. Alright, so let's see what we have coming. So now we see those rings, those green rings, they're being populated. So I'm going to go ahead and take this just so we can see this a little bit better. I'm going to go ahead and plug that in, and we'll change the color so we can see some variation in the color there. Okay. Okay, so now you're seeing that tessellated. Okay, so one last thing I want to do here, just to bring home the point of this one, morph one object per bounding box. So let's say that I took this here, this shape, this extruded shape, and let's say I mirrored it, and I'm going to mirror this as a 3-point mirror, so I can mirror it vertically. So I'm going to pick that point, okay, 3 points to mirror. So now I have this ring I have is made up of these 2 extrusions. So what I'm going to do, instead of bringing a third ring, I'm just going to Boolean union those so that they become one object. Okay, so that's one object now. Oh, I didn't want a Boolean union. Why? Oh, there it is. There's my Boolean union. Okay, so I'm going to set that. Set one geometry. Okay, so now if I hide this box and I hide this surface, okay, so there we have it. There we have this nice ring that's going around these 3D objects. Okay, so I think that gets us through it. I think that will get you pretty far with the box morph technique. So remember, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Follow me on Instagram. Leave some comments below what you like, what you didn't like, what you'd like to see more of. I'd like to hear from you. I love this virtual community that I've created here through these videos. So that's it for this one, and I will see you next time.